Public a couple of minutes late. All good? Right, I'll just wait for my magic phone to say it's 9:30 and then we'll open the meeting. Welcome those online. Welcome, Robin. All right, 9:30. Right, so let's open this meeting with a kara kia. Thank you, Deputy Mayor Dale, if you want to lead that. Thank you.
Mai te pai maunga, raro ki te tai. Mai te awa tonga, raro ki te awa raki. Tēnei te hapori awhiai taratahi, whanno, home, haramai te toki, home hui tā.
Yeah. Thank you. Just welcome everybody, staff, particularly Jacques. Councillors know Jacques, our audit director. I think he's going to speak to a couple of items on the agenda. And Jacques, you're very welcome to stay for the whole meeting. Thank you very much. When we bring him to the table. Huh? So we've got apology from Marty. Do you have any other apologies? I'm happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Dale. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any conflicts of interest for decisions for this committee?
Thanks, Philip. I've got one. The company I work for is Audition Stevens, is mentioned in the public text too.
Can we just hold that till we do the public excluded? Okay. Thanks. Brian, any others? All right. No conflicts of interest. So just remind me, Mr. Executive, when we come to public excluded, that again. Thank you. Public forum, no public forum. Confirmation of our minutes held 24th of May. It only seems a couple of weeks ago. Any comments, corrections? Take it as read. Steve C's happy to move. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor Dale. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. First item on the agenda, 6.1. Risk management with affordable water reforms. Thank you for that extensive report, Mr. Chief Executive. We'll take your report as read. Are there any highlights, new information or lowlights that you want to bring to the committee's attention?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I think the report highlights a number of risks that we are managing in flight. A lot of those risks that we can deal with ourselves, we are getting on with. So risks around securing a debt number with the Department of Internal Affairs. And as you can see in the paper, we've pushed back a little bit and secured a slightly higher debt number of around $9 million compared to the DIA's assessment of 8.7. The next piece that we are working on to secure is the stranded overhead number, which is an estimate of the level of overheads left behind after the separation of Borders reform. So we're working through that with our team, and we're getting a peer review. That will then go and be submitted against the DIA's assessment of stranded overhead, and we will have a similar conversation like we've had with here. The other piece that is a risk is around the go live date, and we've all talked about the go live date for a number of occasions, and that's really up to the minister now. Now that ability is in the legislation to pass an order in council and set the go live date for water services entities. The last risk I'd really like to highlight is around our staff. Having uncertainty is the biggest detractor in terms of employment, and keeping our staff both interested in their day-to-day job and belief that there is a future for all of them as part of this transition is really important. So our focus will go on both the staff that are going to transition to Three Waters reform, those that could potentially transition or may stay with council, and those that are left behind. So probably our biggest unknown with all of this is how we will continue to manage staff engagement throughout this process.
Okay.
Happy to take questions.
The question I have is the elephant in the room. As I understand, a certain date in October may have significant bearing on it, and at that stage I think that's probably one of the immediate risks. So what happens if a certain selected group of people by the voters of New Zealand are elected, they are promising to repeal and replace within the 100 days. So that isn't actually, can you want to comment on that? Yep.
So there's 4 pieces of legislation that have been passed or will be passed by the time Parliament rises. So there's 2 pieces around the Water Services Entity Act. There's a Consumer and Guarantees Act, which is looking at that will be managed by MB, and there is the Water Services Amendment Act, which changes the entities into 10. Now, whatever happens with the general election in October, I'm sure the Mayor might know better than I am, it is far more difficult to repeal legislation once it's enacted. And what I'm saying is there's 4 pieces of legislation that have been enacted. So it's going to be fortunately difficult to repeal the legislation. So what I anticipate may happen is there will be changes to either the time frame that the water services will be implemented in. So it could quite easy, given that it's an order in council, it's quite easy that the time frame could be changed and could be extended for a period of years beyond the election. The other thing that may happen is just around the ownership models that are available for the councils and the representation. So that would be my expectation. But given there will be 4 pieces of legislation enacted, changing that will be quite difficult.
Yeah. The only issue is, my understanding is the Auckland and Northland is already in the Act anyway, so that's not actually subject to order in council. Councillor, so Deputy Mayor Dale.
Yeah, I mean, this whole report, does the Minister or DIA or Audit or any of the people who should be all over the potential risk to councils, I mean, unless they troll through our agenda, they wouldn't see it. Should we be sending this sort of report to those people so that in the future, no one can say they weren't aware of the potential risks for councils like us? Because everything that's set out there is real that we're having to live with. Now, I'm sure DIA and the Minister are, looking for the opportunities and the sales pitches and things like that. Do you think they're aware of these types of risks that we're having to grapple with, which ultimately will be audited and our performance going forward?
Not nearly as aware as we are.
So the question is, should we be front footing it and making sure that whatever happens in the future, no one can say they weren't told or they didn't know?
Good.
Be happy to circulate it.
Yeah. Mayor Ron, have you got a comment on that with your experience?
Well, I'd say in the normal course of events, you would have that opportunity we could take an opportunity to either seek an appointment with the Minister or go before select committee, and which is a strong place to make those points to all parties. But right now we're running up to the election and Parliament's about to close.
Yeah. Well, I think.
And so I think really the place where the biggest punch will be made is, yes, put a copy through to the Minister. Whether it gets read in this period of time or not is the big question. By the Minister, that is. It'll certainly get read by staff, but I think probably pushing through through the DIA officials is probably important right now.
And other candidates?
Yeah, and to candidates.
What about your local MP?
We could do that.
You could do that?
Yeah, but whether it's going to get read right now over the next few months is.
But we'll have on record that
Yes.
we have made them fully aware as we've become aware of the very real risks that we have to contend with.
Yeah, good point. Thank you.
I mean, I'll just open up to other questions. I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, got a question.
I've got full council here today.
Yep. So just in terms of my normal rule, so very happy that non-members can ask questions, but we don't want to debate the resolution. So, and also because we've got a rather large agenda, a lot to get through, we'll just keep the questions very focused. We've got Brian, then Ron.
One quick question that Jeff maybe aren't able to answer is I see the significant risk to our ratepayers is obviously the reduction in service that we're going to receive, but mainly the billing, and that hasn't been sorted yet. You know, we could end up doing all the invoicing and taking all the plaque for all the misdemeanors that this new entity throws at us, you know, and that's one of the biggest risks for us as councillors, because we're going to be the ones that get it, and the ratepayers are going to have to, we're going to be their port of call. Jeff, is there anything more that's in this report that's come out about the billings and the service levels?
Good question. Thank you. The initial view was councils would be required to undertake billing on behalf of the water services entities until July 2029. One of the amendments that went through as the legislation was, as the entities were split from 4 into 10, they reduced that to July 2027. So we will be legally required to undertake billing from whatever time we go live until July 2027, and thereafter it will be on a commercial arm's length basis for negotiate. And that shows a strong desire that they want the water services entities to actually separate from council, and billing is a key component of that. We will be required up till July 2027.
And just point of clarification, we can charge reasonable costs through that negotiation. But I think that the decision, if we object to it, is if I remember the legislation, it's arbitered by the Minister of Local Government decides. So if we disagree with the NTU about how much they should pay us, the Minister of Local Government makes that final decision of what we get paid.
Thank you.
Is there any question? Got Councillor, then Steve C.
No, I'll go, Steve.
So-
Councillor Cretney first.
Just, you mean,
Oh, Councillor, oh, my goodness. Oh. That's once.
Jeff, you mentioned Morrison Low.
Yep.
Is there a period of time that's going to take? Did you mention a time period?
No, I haven't. I noticed the team are meeting with Morrison Low today. So the first step was we had our consultant undertake the review of what could be stranded overhead cost. And so we've got an assessment on what that number might be. The next step is to have a peer review so that when we go back and have a discussion with DIA, we've not just got one person's opinion, we've actually had a peer review of that. So we anticipate that, you know, that's probably going to take about a month.
Yeah, we're in
About a
the
month.
middle of it now.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just on that question, right, my concern is I've seen some other numbers of stranded overheads, and I'm convinced that we'll be lucky. They said 2 years in the
Yeah,
principle.
that's what
I would be lucky if we get 6 months.
well,
In terms of the number, the dollars that have been allocated.
question.
Yeah, all right.
Councillor Ayling.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just had a question on page 20, you're talking about as a risk, and the risk that is loud and clear in my head is if they take our asset and they do leave us with the debt because they're still figuring out the logistics there. And I see you say that they want a staggered model unless it is under 20 million, which we are. What risk do you see of us being left with any Waters debt after the transition date? And what legal standing would we have to question that decision?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Councils deal with debt in different ways. So some councils have their debt that is pulled together and not tagged against specific assets. And that creates a problem with calculating how much of the debt relates to a particular group, like Waters assets.
Yep.
And I know some of the councils are having major problems separating out what debt relates to what group of asset. Carterton is actually in a really good place because our debt is tagged against specific assets of the project. So it's much clearer for us as to what our debt number is, and that's why we've been able to have a conversation with the DIA about what the number should be. So I don't see there being a risk around the quantum of the number, and I think that because we're relatively small in terms of a debt number, I don't see there being a risk of not having that paid out. So I think they'll try and mop up a lot of small councils
Yep.
like Carterton very quickly, and they'll be left with the big councils that have challenges around the allocation of debt to asset and the quantum of the number. So it is a risk. You are absolutely right. We would be remiss to say it's not a risk. I don't view it as a high risk at this stage.
Okay, can I just throw my view with my other councils that I work in, I would say that Carterton's a low risk. There are other councils, and the larger the council, the more complicated debt. But also if you throw in, if they've actually spent a lot of money on stormwater assets, it's not clear what stormwater assets are actually being transferred to, what actually assets are going to be remaining with the council, therefore what debt remains with council is also up to date. So I think we're actually, in terms of the risk profile, I would say debt would be relatively low compared with, my view is staff is actually a significant risk, right? Because of the uncertainty, right? Where you've got uncertainty, that actually creates uncertainty for staff, and that's for the chief executive to manage and identify.
Yeah. I haven't tried to work my way through those 4 pieces of legislation. Is there anything in there which sets out the way in which the new water services entities will charge for water? Because that seems to me to be the risk that ratepayers, they may get a reduction in rates, but they may get a water bill which is 10 times as large as that service.
So the third piece of legislation, I forget its name, is essentially looked after by EPI, which is the Consumer Protection and Pricing legislation, and that sets out the framework for the water services entities' charging regimes and how they are meant to interact with communities. Now, it doesn't provide the benchmarks. It provides a process for MB and the water services regulator to set the benchmarks. And what I would expect that legislation to do would be provide what I would call a glide path. So you would have a glide path of price, probably price increases, and you would have an upper bound and a lower bound of that glide path. And that may use some kind of CPI type metric. And over time, you would expect that you would have, in parallel to the glide path, you would also have a standardisation of pricing across the water services entity, so that you didn't have a cubic metre of water in Wellington costing a quarter of the price of a cubic metre of water in Marsden. And you would have some standardisation within the region of the water services entity to balance pricing, but that would have to fit within a glide path of a maximum amount that pricing could increase or decrease over a period of time. And so the legislation creates the framework for that. What it doesn't do is give you the numbers. And that's the $1 million question as to what those numbers, the glide path maximums and minimums will be as set by MB. And at this stage, we just don't know.
And how quickly they'll change.
Yeah. And if there's anything.
Does that help answer the question?
A little bit.
Can I just
Read and you shall be horrified.
The issue is, if you look at what happened with Auckland Council over both water charges and rating, there was specific provision within the Auckland Act that allowed basically the capping of rates to no greater than 10% per annum. So they had to actually merge all the councils into one rating system. I can't remember the number. I think it was over, it was 3 years or something.
Yeah.
But there was a transition, so they came down to one system. But no individual property provided. This is the killer with Auckland, the complication. If you bought and sold a house, you're outside of that regime because you deemed a new owner. But so there will be, I would imagine, just supporting what the chief executive said, I imagine there'll be some provisions that are put in by the new entity to smooth that change over a period of time. But I would say is I can't see, with the amount of work that's required across the whole country, let alone in Wellington region, I can't see the bills actually going down. And that's not a political statement.
No.
Just the amount of work that's required.
Even though the sales pitch on television
No.
was a third of what you're paying now.
Yeah, but that's over 50 years in today's dollars. Right.
And the question will become, how much do you ring fence? So do you ring fence a water supply or a wastewater system because that's new and those ratepayers should be paying for it? And then if you do ring fence, how big is the ring fence? Do you ring fence Wairarapa? Do you ring fence Wellington? And then within those, how do you then cross subsidise? Because the whole point of the model is to get, to get cross subsidisation to the edge of the network, where it's more expensive and longer distance and fewer customers to build stuff. So it tends to be more expensive. Whereas in the core, it's a whole lot easier and cheaper because you've got shorter distances, bigger pipes and far more customers. And so connections are much cheaper. And I think the cross subsidisation question is one that it's going to take a long time to figure out, and that will determine a big piece of what pricing will look like in the future.
Yep.
So I'll preempt. I've got questions and I'm very conscious that we have a full report. We have a limited period of time, and I certainly don't want to hog the floor. I'll just start by saying I'm really impressed with the quality of this audit report.
Team's done a very good job.
This meeting, your team.
A lot of people involved in
The
it.
team's done an outstanding job, and I don't think I've ever seen a time when there's been so much reform, information and consequences in such a report. So I just got to start by saying, Jeff, well done to you and all your team, your senior management team. But sadly, because of the content, there's just so many questions in the head, most of which probably can't be answered right now because we are where we're at. But I want to pick. Now, good that we picked up on the debt. The stranded costs thing worries me, and I hate to say it, Mr. Chair, I share the same fear as you that the predicted 2 years won't happen, and the level of funding won't be there guaranteed going forward. I guess the one that's sticking in my head right now is probably on page 22, 23, and it's around customer data. And if I look at my serious concern for our ratepayers right now is security in their minds of the quality delivery of service, the quality of service, and what they're going to be paying for, because we have no picture on that. A lot of it's going to come down to the makeup of the WSE.
Yes.
And it's going to come down to the RRG. Do I get that right? As to who those people are and how they actually manage the asset. But if I come to page 22 and 23, the thing that sits behind those questions is the amount of data, the status of the other entities who are going to form part of the WSE,
Mm-hmm.
what the status is on their asset management plan, their capital plans, the available data that will enable the WSE to accurately bill and calculate. Can you share your comments and your views, Jeff, around that very issue, data capture? I know we're in a good space, but my concerns are for the constituents. What's the impact going to be on them for other entities that we're going to be lumped in with, who aren't necessarily, I think, in the same space? Can you comment?
Absolutely. Thank you, Worship. There are 9 councils moving into the entity G, water services entity, of which Carterton is one. Of those councils, only 2 use smart meter water systems, and that's us and Kapiti. And so we have far more accurate data on customers, on customer use of water than any other council apart from Kapiti. And there has been conversations about whether or not Carterton and Kapiti move first in terms of the data transition, because we have the best quality data on our customers. So the other councils have much different data, and they don't have the volumetric information that we have from smart meter systems. But I think your question also moves into data security. So we are in essence taking our ratepayer database and duplicating it, and that will be separate with a separate entity that isn't bound as tightly as we are as a council in terms of data quality. So that is a real concern around that information, particularly where that information contains bank information, direct debit information, credit card information, and customer data. There is risk always in doing that, and I think we need to be really conscious of that risk as we go through this transition. So the test data that we've been using and implementing into the system doesn't include that sort of information. But when we do go live, that data will no longer be in our control, and it will be of the control of the Water Services Entity, and they will have to look after it as customer confidential information. How they do that is up to them. But you are right, it is a very, very real risk.
And the security of our capital plan going forward, given the status of other entities, Three Water Systems, and their lack of investment. What sort of risk are we facing there that the new WSE might look upon Carterton as being very well off, and therefore not a priority when they consider the issues in Lower Hutt and Wellington and Porirua?
I think the asset management plan will just be an aggregate of 9 asset management plans. So they won't overlay it and say we're going to mix and match and pick projects. They will just aggregate the 9 asset management plans from the councils and say that's our new asset management plan. I think what will happen then will be the priority as to where we don't have enough people to do all of the work.
That's right.
Where are we going to prioritise?
Yeah.
And I share your concern that councils that have looked after and have higher quality assets that don't necessarily have the burning bridges or platforms that other councils do are going to be pushed down the priority set. And I do share that concern for our community.
Can I also share, just add to that your concern? You talked about capacity in terms of people. I would say capacity in terms of funding, because the original rationale for having this new regime was that this new regime would have unlimited ability to borrow. Okay, yeah. I think you've just right. Okay, you read my thoughts.
And not unlimited,
right?
not unlimited ability to magic up workers and contractors time.
But I think the issue for me is, in fact, now we've moved 10 entities, that has actually gone down about 15 clicks.
Yeah.
And I think there was a gross overestimation of the ability of even the 4 entities to have unlimited borrowing, because someone still's got to repay that debt. So I think that to me is a real risk, that what you had in your capital plan, because it doesn't meet the new criteria set by the new water services entity, will actually go down the click, potentially significant, right? There are, that's it, but that worries me.
Is it a view then that we might be better going as late as we possibly can, using that time to implement as much of our capital plan as we think sensible we can manage, so that it is handed over to the new entity already as work already in process, a contract signed and work in progress?
I think that's a really good point. So if we could hand over the best quality asset that we could possibly deliver, that's the single most important thing we can do for our community. Is hand over the highest quality asset that we could, because that secures our future for as long as possible. I think if we go back to page 15, there's a small image on page 15, and I'd just like to talk to that between, and I think this is your point, Your Worship, around the asset management plan, and certainly around the funding and pricing plan. So the entities will have the ability, we have the ability to expand our debt into 275% to 275% of our revenue. And the water services entities will have the ability to expand debt to 800% of their revenue. So so we're 2.75 times, they'll be 8 times the revenue. Now, as you all know, when you bought that house on a mortgage years ago, the bank didn't just consider how much money they were going to loan you. They also took into account how much your income was. And so the picture here talks about OPEX, credit rating, the capital investment required, and also the revenue required. So that goes to Councillor Lawrence's question around pricing plans and how much revenue the entity will generate, because if they don't have enough revenue, they won't be able to borrow 8 times the revenue number because they can't afford it. As we found with mortgages, you can't, mortgage up to the hilt because you haven't got the income to pay the interest and principal back. So I think really within the model, we need to consider that there's an expansion of the debt capacity, but that really can only be maximised when there is an expansion of revenue. And that leads to a conversation of somebody's going to hike the price on our communities.
Absolutely.
That's where it comes in. Thank you. I think 800 back inside that, but yeah. Because someone's still got to repay it. Even if you borrow from the bank, they still want you to be able to repay it. Steve, same time.
Thanks, Chair. Just going back, one of my questions that I had was around GNC diggers and the fact that council signed a 5-year agreement with them. Are they fully informed as to, even some of the comments within this report, which is fantastic, are they fully informed and comfortable with the path forward, knowing that work could be reprioritised that's in their program already once we do finally transition?
So one of the reasons we signed a 5-year contract with GNC Diggers was to give them the surety that they would be a contractor to the water services entity. So nothing is certain, but at least we could give them contractual certainty that they would transition and their contract would novate. I think what is really important for us as a council and for GNC Diggers is to set our asset management plan to include the work that we expect GNC Diggers to undertake over the next 3 to 5 years. And that's the best thing we can do, is set it in our asset management plan and fund it as part of our long-term plan. And if we do that, we've secured their future and our community's future.
I think it's the ability. The issue is, right, like, I understand the concern, but I think we've talked about before, there's not enough resources in the country to deliver what's required. So if you're delivering water services, there will be a future. Just it's that contractual relationship may change after that contract has expired. Councillor Grace.
I had a question with regards to the stranded overhead as well. Just thinking back to the better off funding, which was canned very quietly when they rejigged this plan. Chances are the stranded overhead promise will be canned as well. Will that result in redundancy of staff here in Carterton?
We're still working our way through that. I think there is risk with staff that where part of their job or a significant part of their job relates to waters, but not the majority of their job. And so where it's up to 50% of their job may relate to waters, is where we need to look at what council need, what we will look like in the future. So there is risk, but we haven't made any decisions at this point. And I think it's really important for all of our staff to recognise that we want to work through this process with everyone together. So I wouldn't make any commitments about redundancies at this point at this stage, because Every staff member's case is different and I want to consider them on a case by case basis.
And how many staff individual cases are there that could be in that less than 50%?
Off the
Cool.
top of my head, I don't know the answer to that.
I think that the issue is the waters work is so interwoven to virtually all of our roles. So it's pulling apart, and that's the work we're doing at the moment. Is really discovering to what degree does it influence our roles. So all of us sitting here have a component of some waters, for example. So we're just starting to do that work now. Some may be at 10% level, some may be, I mean, sitting under that 50% because that's when the water entity part kicks in, but certainly under that. So yeah, we haven't really done it. Yes, we're thinking more around functions and service levels rather than staff specifically. So what are the functions that we're left with? What are we doing?
The picture is slightly complicated with merger conversations with other councils. And I guess what we're conscious of is we don't want to make a decision around staff members' role that in a few months' time we wished we hadn't. So we're, as I said, each case is individual and we will work through the individual's cases on a one-on-one basis.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one more question? The legislation that was in place before I don't know what you call it, right of the long lives, when all the new ones were passed, the assets remained in some fictionalised view of things in the ownership of councils, and the responsibility for repaying any debt that was taken on by the water services entity rested still as a backstop with the councils and therefore with our ratepayers, which I see as a ratepayer as a significant risk. Is that still the case? Has that changed in any way?
So that's a good question. I think the term ownership has a number of contexts, and we would consider ownership as a Westminster property right. No, I own it.
I can do something with it.
I can do something with it. Whereas I think our ownership of the water services entities is more akin to the Kiwi share. Does anyone remember the Kiwi share when they split telephone out?
Yes.
So it's more akin to an intangible share of the water services entity's parent body, and the physical asset will be owned legally by the water services entity. So I think the word ownership is probably a little bit overused in terms of council's ownership of the asset. We will have ownership of a shareholding of the water services entity's parent.
But we will still ultimately be responsible for its debts.
I think I'm not convinced we'll be responsible for its debts in the event it fails. I think that that might be ring fenced sufficiently or sheet back to the Crown. One of the conversations that we've had is with a credit rating agency. The first thing they'll look at when giving you a credit rating is your trading history. Now, with the water services entity, there is no trading history. So in those first few years when they need to borrow money off the market, they will need some kind of backstop guarantee. And I think the conversation we've been having with the NTU is that should be the Crown. That shouldn't be us. That should be the central government, because this is your reform. You should provide the backstop potentially for up to 5 years. And then the water services entity will have a trading history and they could go and get debt in their own right. But at this stage, I don't think the debt's going to sheet back to us, or the risk will sheet back to us in the event the water services.
They'll own the benefits and you'll own the consequences.
Well,
Don't want to be a guarantor.
A little bit like the whole lot of them in Ukraine. You own the farm, but you don't own anything that comes off of it.
Everybody starved to death.
I think the challenge will be for us is that we will own the community relationship, and we will be the first port of call for the community to come to when things go wrong. Because there is no one that is sitting around the table that's got a sign on their head that says, I'm the water services entity, complaints here. So our challenge will be is how do we deal with community expectations for things that we can really no longer control? That's our challenge.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yeah,
Here, Ron, you got
I guess,
other questions?
yeah, no, I'll probably back up a tad because we've got quite a bit of business to go through. But what's standing out to me, and it's probably you more, Mr. Chair, in your professional capacity, the way this is shaping out, it seems to me that there are those councils who have gone holtus-boltus into supporting these reforms because the advantage they get is they lose their debt.
Correct.
Okay. But from this report, what I take is we've got no control over the asset management plan.
Yep.
Got no control over the capital plan. We've got questions around the delivery of service, both in quality and customer satisfaction levels. And we have no understanding as to what the cost to our ratepayers is going to be once this entity comes into being and starts charging. Okay. And I've got to take on board the CE's advice and caution that the banks are only, the lenders are only going to lend based on the revenue that the WC is collecting off of ratepayers.
Yep.
Which means running it up.
It's not a great sales pitch, is it?
No, it sounds like great reform.
Just point of clarification, Mayor Ron, none of my other 9 local authorities actually have high debts and have been racing into this reform with a great degree of speed.
Just why we're.
But the issue, look, I mean, to me is this is the government's reform, right? Unfortunately, we are the meat in the sandwich, literally, because our ratepayers, when I sit around this table, I refer to the Carterton people as my ratepayers, right? That they are at the end of the line, and they are the ones that actually we should be advocating for. That this is not about the council risks, this is about risks for the community, which I think your report actually does. Thank you, Jeff. If there's no more questions, what I'd like to do is actually, at the moment, we've got a recommendation, we just received the report. To me is I think we need to probably expand that recommendation. I would actually like to say is that, we thank the staff, for the report.
Commend,
thank you. So we received the report, we commend the staff for their good report. Taking on what Deputy Mayor Dale suggested, that this report be provided to the local MP, the Minister of Local Government, and any
DIA.
You know, that's the same person, eh?
Yeah. But you write to him as the minister, and you actually write to him as your local MP. Okay, because you might actually you might meet him somewhere and say, look, if I got a report for you, you might need to read. That's up to you. The issue is then I think we need a further update without regurgitating this report all over again. I don't want to put more work on you. But no, we do have a meeting in November.
Post-election.
And I think I don't want you to regurgitate this report because I think that is this thing is the key issues you have identified in this report, what has actually changed.
Mr. Chair, just a bit of guidance before we move there. I guess the 2 issues that still seem to me to be lacking in clarity are the stranded costs, but also from your comments earlier, stranded work that's not accurately identified.
So in-flight projects.
It's the stormwater question.
Oh, yeah.
If stormwater only includes the pond, but it doesn't include the wetland around the pond.
What's the land around
and that remains with our ratepayers as a responsibility, then how do we staff that? How do we manage that, having lost all of the people?
Yeah,
That's those areas of lack of clarity
Yeah.
again do concern me.
and I think this is right, as Chief rightly refers to it, this is an in-flight, right, issue.
Yeah. Mm.
So I think it would be good to get an update from the captain of the plane as to where an in-flight announcement as to where we are in terms of getting to our destination. Have we had winds? Have we had to divert because of thunderstorms?
Before we crash.
Yeah, that's the one. Or do we actually have a significant failure that we're going to have to do an emergency landing?
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to
do that.
So are you comfortable with that,
I'm
Mr.
happy
Chief
with that.
Executive?
Yes.
I don't want to overburden you. You've got a lot of work to do, but I think we don't, it's just the key issues,
our role.
what has actually changed, okay? Things that have actually, risks that have been crystallized or risks that have actually had a greater degree of uncertainty. I think would be useful. Now, I don't know how we frame that in the resolution.
I was waiting for
I think
that.
the resolution could be.
I've taken an action point and
But I was going to say
Yeah,
action points.
yeah,
There's two action points
yeah.
there. One to afford the report
Yep.
to the local MP, Minister of Local Government, Minister of DIA.
And also potentially
and
spokesperson for the opposition, if we have an opposition.
The other is the in-flight stuff, which is an action point.
Yeah, okay.
But then it leaves your recommendation quite simple: receive the report and commend the staff
Right.
for the quality, high quality.
High quality of the report. So that's, you prepared just to move that?
Same.
Thank you. Second, Steve C. Do I have any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Welcome, yep. Kelly and Jack to the table. Now, Kelly, if you want to introduce, I'm full disclosure, I met with Jacques yesterday. We had an open and frank discussion. Right? There's nothing in there that would be unhappy that we actually rediscussed today, but in terms of time, all I'm saying is we had that discussion. I think my view is, and I'll say it now so it might stop some of the questions, Jacques is the meat in the sandwich. He has, and Audit New Zealand and even the Office of the Auditor General have to comply with accounting standards. They are the accounting standards board has set the standard. Audit now need to adhere to that in terms of their professional responsibility, and we're the guy at the end of the line. And on that, I'll introduce Kelly. You can introduce the report and hand it over to you two. Thank you.
Morning night, everybody. So this report includes 3 letters from audit. The first being the audit plan. That's an annual letter that we get, or report we get from audit, that sets out the risks and arrangements around this year's audit. There's also the audit engagement letter, which is for 3 years, sets out the arrangements between council and Jacques as the director for the next 3 years audits. And then the audit proposal letter, which includes the audit fees and the work to be done over the next 3 years as well. I will just flag one key point in the report in section 6.5, the risks. So you will recall we have discussed with the committee and council the decision around not completing the resident survey this year. That's how we get some of the results for the performance measures in our annual report. We discussed the risk related to the audit opinion. So Jacques and the team at Audit New Zealand have met with the Audit Review Committee, part of the Office of the Auditor General, and they have concluded that council will receive a qualification in this year's audit report specifically related to those survey questions, because the survey was not completed this year. And I've noted in the report too that at some point council will need to consider what to do going forward. And I know as part of the long-term plan discussions, you are talking about the framework moving forward and how you might like to measure community satisfaction and things in a different way going forward. So those discussions are underway. Otherwise, I'll leave the report as read.
Okay.
I don't know if
Jacques, do you want to make any comments?
Thank you, Philip. Thank you, Kelly, for introducing it. Committee members, I'll just briefly outline sort of a few summary points there in terms of those documents. So in terms of the audit plan, our areas of focus, largely consistent with the previous year, is around the valuation of assets. The next one is drinking water quality performance measures. So similar to last year, there's still some challenges around that. So this year, to further compound the challenges, DI has changed the drinking water quality standards to drinking water quality assurance rules midway through the year, and haven't really determined how those measures to measure your performance should look. So that's something that we're working through in the background, but that's an area that we'll pay some close attention to. And the standard risk of management override of control that's prevalent in all engagements. As always, there's a continued watching brief on the water service entities reform. And then there's a new standards change that will impact on council this year, which is the adoption of PVFRS 48, which is the new service performance reporting standard. Now, in terms of the impacts, it's not significant, but there will be some additional disclosures. It's a bit more prescriptive than what the previous IPSAS 1 requirements were. And that sort of segues into some of the increases in terms of audit fees that's been proposed. Standards requirements keep evolving, cost of compliance keeps growing, the requirements on us as auditors keep expanding. Ultimately, we have those standards as Philip identified that we need to comply with, and ultimately it means that we have to, in terms of our professional obligations, make sure that we've covered all of those requirements to be able to issue a safe opinion for your community to rely on. In terms of the audit fees, so as I'll take as read the audit proposal letter, but essentially the fees have increased close on 30% for the year. Now that's due to a multitude of factors. Number one driver for that is just the cost of being able to retain staff in the current market, and there's a global auditor shortage, as has been mentioned on numerous occasions in the media as well. And that means for us to be able to attract and retain staff, it's costing more to have those staff. Under legislation, we have to ensure that our audit fees that we set are fair both to yourselves and to us as an organisation. We have to be sustainable, and that means that unfortunately we can't operate at a loss. So those increased costs that we're experiencing in terms of being able to attract and retain staff does mean that impacts on fees in the long term, and then coupled with the increased scope of auditing and accounting standards, it unfortunately culminates in that increase that you've seen. I'll open it up to any questions.
Deputy Mayor Dale.
Thank you. Yeah, and notwithstanding Philip's opening comments and the comments you've just made, I suppose the issue I have, and I accept the explanation, I mean, we're all familiar with staff shortages and things like that, but on page 63, we've got the estimated audit hours. Now, and this is I guess a challenge to who sets the auditing program for a council of this size. I mean, based on those hours, that's at a 40-hour week, that's 15 weeks of one person auditing this council. 15 weeks. Brian can build a cow shed in 15 weeks. Steve can build a house. You know what I mean? That's an extraordinary amount of time. One auditor can potentially only do 3 audits a year. I just think that the expectation of the scope of work of who sets the program for a council of this size is so far out of kilter now that drives the cost of the contractor, Audit New Zealand, completing their task. It's supposed to be on our behalf, but I would challenge those who set the program. 15 weeks of a person to audit our operation is extraordinary in my mind. So I'll not a question, but I could probably find one in there somewhere.
Maybe say is, you know, if I can actually rephrase the question.
Sure.
Jacques, in terms of the level of work that's required for this council compared with something like Auckland, as well, you probably don't do Auckland, but in terms of a larger council, there are probably, it's disproportionate. Would that be
I think that that's a fair summary, Philip. Ultimately, as I said, we've got these standards that we need to comply with, and ultimately we have to go through the same process irrespective of the size of the audit. The proportions that are impacted by the size of the council would be things like your sample sizes, the extent of testing, but ultimately in terms of the international standards of auditing, there's a process that we have to go through, and that process does not deviate based on the size of the council. It's some of those elements, the amount of work in that process will change depending on the size, but ultimately the process that we have to go through dictates a large number of these hours.
And in that regard, it's a shame that many local government elected representatives don't get the same level of cover than some of our neighbours do when we're doing exactly the same job, if I can put it that way.
No, Grace or Mira?
No.
I just had a question, page 63 as well. Looking at the estimated audit hours, I question the figures that have been selected for the budget for 2023, 24, 25, when our actuals were higher this last year. That doesn't give me much confidence that the cost isn't going to go up exponentially.
Thank you. That's a valid observation. And to explain the rationale behind that is there's an inherent element of learning. And last year we had a number of new auditors on the engagement. Even myself, I was new to council. So within those actual hours, I wouldn't class that as inefficiencies, but there was an element of additional learning that's over and above what's expected for this year.
Seems a bit odd that we're paying for the increase in staff and staff salaries, and we're also paying for their learning experience as well.
Perhaps I could jump in there. The fees that we were charged were based on Audit New Zealand's budget. So that they estimated the fees and they only charged their fees according to budget. They didn't actually charge their fees according to the number of hours actually worked.
That makes it even worse.
In their defence, they Audit New Zealand wore the additional cost of training new staff on our audit.
That's okay.
My wife was an auditor once.
I was an auditor once.
She became an artist.
That's scary. That's very scary. Miron.
I just reinforces my view that we can become more efficient and cost effective if we were one big council instead of three councils paying that size of fee. Because, the standards are applied equally to Carterton, as Jack's already pointed out separately, as they are to Auckland and Wellington. And that's not the Auditor General's office or Jack's fault. That is the system the way it is. So we can save money by.
Yeah, can we have a separate discussion on that one? Thank you. All right. I've got some better. I would actually like to thank Jacques for his openness, right? I have been in some meetings where we haven't had the same openness. I also, your increase is relatively light compared with some that I actually said. One council has actually written to the Auditor General complaining about the fees because it was completely out of line. I think, look, Jacques, right, he's in a difficult place, and I thank Jacques for his openness in terms of this. I think it's really clear that we've now got a gold standard in terms of the expectation from DIA, from the Accounting Standards Board, that we actually need to adhere to. And I think that is probably the appropriate discussion that is had with the new government, that we're actually gold plating everything from this when we don't need gold plating. That's my view. That's all I'll say. At this
But that's
stage,
not-
otherwise I get- no?
That's not joke.
Sorry?
That's not Shark's problem.
No, it's not. Absolutely not. Totally. He's got, huh?
Yeah, good job.
I could give you some other examples, but
Yes.
we'll move on. Right, so any further questions? We've got a recommendation. I'm prepared to move the recommendation on page 26. Do I have a seconder?
Which one are you moving?
All of them, 1 to 3. Might be if you don't, because you're actually giving you,
I'm signing the.
you're signing the things.
It's
So
about me.
you're happy, Mayor Dale? Any
Happy's
comments?
not the right word, but prepared.
Prepared? Yeah. I think, maybe we actually say, look, I think we just receive it and note in the minutes, right?
That's right.
Right.
Bear in mind, when
All right, we've got a move and a seconder. Any further discussion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Thank you, Jacques. Just stay, don't move away because our Treasury update report will take 30 seconds, more than 30 seconds. Kelly, next item, 6.3, our Treasury report.
Thank you. So this is our standard report, updating you on the position of our treasury at 30th of June. So you'll note that we are in compliance with our treasury policy. Good. Other than that, I will leave it as read. To take questions.
Any questions? Councillor Grace, thank you.
Kelly, I just wondered if you could explain the risks with holding that internal debt that we have.
Sure. I think the risks with holding it internally are quite low at this point. Probably it would be more of a risk at this point to transfer to external debt, given the interest rates at the moment. All of that internal debt is related to Three Waters assets and have been factored into the debt settlement process with DIA. So I would feel quite comfortable leaving it where it is, knowing that it is going to be transferred to the new Waters Services entity on our transition.
Is there a reason we don't have more internal debt if it is a better rate?
So I guess when you're using internal debt, you are using your cash reserves.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a balance there with wanting to make sure that you're not depleting all your reserves. External debt is a good tool to use.
Yeah.
And we do need to have some cash in the bank for our liquidity, and then also for things like investing in our managed funds and that kind of thing. So I guess there's considerations there. I probably wouldn't be advocating for more internal debt at this point, but I would be quite happy to leave it where it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just on that internal debt, so you've got some internal debt that relates to Three Waters, but that has been agreed by DIA.
It has, yeah, it's part of our calculation for settlement.
I'm aware of one council, because they had very strict criteria about how internal debt was being managed, that they actually had to be charging the activity interest, and their policy wasn't not to charge interest because everyone was paying the same. They just thought it was a merry-go-round. DIA initially said, no, it doesn't meet the criteria. And they said, well, that's a bit bizarre. The same people are paying. So they, so that's good. You've actually got over that hurdle in terms of managing that risk. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you for that. Do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 76? Thank you, Grace. Do I have a seconder? I'll second. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Next one, 6.4, progress on the Audit New Zealand recommendations. Kelly, again.
Another standard report. There are a few changes in red. We continue to try and make progress against the audit recommendations. We haven't received a formal letter from Audit New Zealand on their interim audit for this year. But verbally, they have said that there are no new issues that they've identified at this point. I suppose aside from the resident survey issue. I'll take the report as read.
Any questions? No questions? Oh, since Jacques actually in in the room, just put you on the spot here, should have asked. I, sorry?
I was saying that we should have gone and sat down.
No, you would have brought him back again. Just on page, have you got our copy of our agenda there?
I do.
Page 86 of our agenda. Error of classifications of expenditure, right? And the note there from Kelly. I'm just surprised it was actually necessary. Do you want to just comment on what I thought it would be beneficial rather than necessary in terms of your criteria?
So for that's a very valid point. I mean, it is ultimately a judgment in terms of the risk rating there. That could very well just be noted as a beneficial rating, and happy to revise that risk rating. Essentially, at the point in time, some of those matters that was raised, I think subsequently, some of them were actually not of as much of a magnitude as was what initially was thought from the work that was reported by the team. So we've cleared through those with management's comments, but I haven't subsequently revised it.
No, until you do the report, so we might get a downgrade, is what you're saying?
And
Improved.
to be honest,
Down in terms of the hierarchy. It was a tongue in cheek comment. Right, okay. Any,
Not just, Joe, are you comfortable, and I'm looking at page 82, project waste, management wastewater treatment project. Are you comfortable with where we are? We've made huge progress in that space over the year. Well, in fact, over the last 2 years, but specifically over this last year.
So Mayor, on that point, that's something that we classify as sort of broader audit risk, and that we keep a bit of a watching brief on. So we just update our understanding of how things have moved. We do understand that there has been good progress made against that, but in terms of the actual recommendation, we haven't done an in-depth review against that recommendation. That'll be done as part of the final audit.
Great. Yeah, okay.
okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Questions from council?
Can I have a mover for the recommendation on page 78? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Dale. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Steve. All those, no further discussion. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. Those against carried. Thank you, Jack and Kelly. Health, safety and well-being update.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
I did. I was looking at you over the magic. Went behind my back. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Morning, everyone. Just hopefully the report is pretty straightforward. Just highlighting a couple of things that probably won't be of a surprise, but just around winter illness. So you'll see included some average sick leave stats in there for you. Just wanting to have a look. Obviously, it's makes sense that during winter we're going to see more with our COVID caution as well. On top of that, we definitely are encouraging people to stay home when they're unwell. Unfortunately, many of our staff can work from home. So in terms of productivity, it's been managed quite well by managers, I would say. A recent, I'm not sure if you caught it, a recent survey, national survey around increase in staff absences since COVID puts the average rate at about 5.5 per employee across the country. So increased from around 2, I think it was before COVID. And ours at 22 hours, I think it is, so it's around 3 days. We're actually managing the time of sick leave quite well. And although we have a very generous sick leave policy in place, we're very confident. I think we've talked about this before, that that's been used really well. So happy around that. And the other one is just an increase in near miss reporting that you may notice. So which we see as a really great thing. It's an opportunity. And quite a few of those are generated, proactively generated through on-site inspections, and we're doing some peer observations. So our Health, Safety and Wellbeing Committee are playing a really good role in role modelling and leading those observations and safety and across the board. So happy to answer any questions.
Questions of Jerry? No questions? I've got one on page 96 6 of the agenda. You talk about you're doing auditing of the contractors. When you do that audit, does anyone actually go out and look at what is actually happening on site rather than just making inquiries?
Yeah, so these two are more desk-bound ones, but our last report, we're on-site ones. So yeah, absolutely. Sometimes the challenge in terms of reporting to the committee is the timing of when we have contractors available to go on-site and audit. But yeah, it's definitely our intention to provide on-site audits as a real practical, opportunity to evaluate how well they're doing.
Yeah. Councillor Grace, thank you.
I might just have one question about recruitment. It says that we're advertising 7 vacancies at the moment. Are they new roles or just filling people as they've retired?
I think there is one new role, 2 new roles. So one in the waste management space that we approved in the annual plan, and the second one recruiting. So there's a newly created roles and there's a replacement roles.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Ron? Mayor Ron, I should say. It's twice. Oh, 3 times on my out. Yeah. Okay.
Performance reviews not like.
Well, it's not my performance review on the agenda, eh? Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I'm just looking at behaviour, occupational safety and health around behaviour, staff safety, and particularly in times when constituents are stressed or suffering challenges. Can you just talk to us about?
Yeah,
we go in there in terms of looking after our staff.
And I'm not sure if you've seen, there has been some publicity in media from other councils that are facing the same issues. So exactly what you're talking about, we're seeing, our community are stressed. There are multiple, issues they're facing, and some of our staff are on the receiving end of some of that frustration. Anything else? So we are, rates time, for example. But the managers are really aware, and the team leaders are really aware of managing those situations. I did raise that we've added social media influence onto our sort of wellbeing radar for staff. So we're just working with Elisa's team around rolling out some training for the team leaders and staff around how to manage those things. So when they see, and it's not on our own Facebook sites, but in the community, other Facebook pages that they do come across, it does have a real personal impact if they're criticised openly in those forums. So, we're certainly mindful of that and trying to support our staff in that way. We've had one incident that is reported on in person where we did have quite a angry or disgruntled customer. Was handled really well. The person, sought advice from their manager straight away, and the manager dealt with and spoke to that person around the behaviour not being acceptable. So we're trying to jump on those issues as they happen really quickly.
That's good to hear, because I mean, from my perspective, I can't help but notice some of the commentary on social media, which is directed at council staff. I'm aware that occasionally you have disagreements with contractors and they deal it directly to staff as opposed to management.
Yes.
And then, of course, there are those who front the counter, the grievances, and who are disgruntled. And combining those 3 together can have a detrimental effect on staff retention and staff satisfaction levels and staff retention. So.
Yeah, that's great. We're about to roll out some more training. So we do training with our particularly frontline staff around dealing with difficult customers, that kind of thing as well. So we're just refreshing that training at the moment for our frontline staff, which includes places like parks and reserves, because they also, out in the field, they also encounter those experiences too.
Thanks. I guess my only other comment. Once everyone's finished.
Yeah. Okay. No, go. I think if the floor is yours. Mayor Ryan?
Yeah, no, I think the one takeaway I take from this report is sectionally 1, senior management's doing a good job of keeping across the issues and protecting, looking after staff, because good staff are hard to get and they're certainly hard to keep when other people are paying, trying to entice them away. But I can't help, and I'm going to direct my question to you and your experience across the board and maybe seek some advice down the line. I can't help but look at things like negative social media comments can cause stress and anxiety for staff. While we have, and then I read another one, working long hours under pressure can lead to poorer mental health, including stressful feelings, increased anxiety. I can't help but think of my councillors. And I have a serious question, and I'd like some advice from you later on as to what is there that if we are thinking about why people don't stand for council, and if we want to keep people and avoid by-elections, and we want to avoid breakdown.
Yep.
As the leader of my team, I can't help but think about my own team.
Yep.
I read a report such as this, and I see nothing anywhere that gives a damn. No evidence of a give a damn. I'm not talking about management staff, it's not their responsibility, but within the bigger picture. So if we can have a conversation around what I might need to be doing in other places along with your support, Philip, because that is a serious issue. I want to keep quality elected representative.
I'm not going to answer your question. All I can say is, look, I share your concern, Mayor Ron. I'm concerned about also not only good councillors getting beaten up, but I also see poor behaviour, which there is no consequences even around the council table. Okay, that's what I'll say on that matter, which affects both other elected members and also staff.
You mean another?
Oh, absolutely. It would not be this. Not absolutely not.
Certainly not here.
Mayor Ryan, if it was happening on any of my councils, right, I would be having words with both not only the mayor but also the council. That is not the case here, I can assure you. Right? I see this as a.
Thank you, Jared.
But I'm really happy. I think I mean really look forward to having that discussion with you.
Thank you.
Are there any?
I've got one
question.
But Jerry, on page 95 in the paragraph near miss, team members that are working remotely basically and do not have radio transmitters, etc. This is a concern, and it is a concern in our business as well, but radio RTs do not work in every situation in our Carterton district, and especially when you get further out the coast. So I'm just wondering whether the solution, and we're working through it at the moment, or we have at the moment, is buying some PLBs, personal locator beings. And one or two of those that can be issued to staff that are going into those remote areas is about the only solution that is available in the hyper remotes at the moment.
We're just looking at that. Oh, sorry.
Bloody good idea.
We have a couple of devices that we're using at the moment that our dog control, animal control have been using. And we're just working out what is going to be the best option, but it is something similar to that actually we need.
It's got to be something.
Right.
It's got to be similar. Yep.
I can only commend that because I owning one myself, and seeing how effective it is for tracking movement and identifying when it hasn't moved.
Yeah, I think that the issue is when it hasn't moved and we've got any protocols.
Yeah.
That, for example, if someone is going into a remote area, that they have actually a call in and a call out when they actually get to a safe position. All right. Okay. Thank you for that, Brian. I've got a recommendation we received for the fort. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Mayor Ron. Seconder. Councillor Grace, all those in favour? No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Carried. Thank you, Jerry. Next item is our government reform. Thank you, Mr. Chief Executive.
Highlight.
Yeah, absolutely.
The majority of the reform update was included in our waters papers, so we've dropped all of the waters out. There hasn't been a great deal of work on the RMA reforms since so mostly we've looked at the future for local government reform, which has come out. I'm sure you'll all be interested in recommendation 11, which is around reducing the voting age to 16. And it ended up in Parliament this week. It's difficult to tell what happened at the moment. And the only other changes that are occurring, there's some legislative changes around Civil Defence Emergency Act and also just around the Building Act. Now, we've reviewed those. There's a Civil Defence Emergency Act. There is quite a lot of work ongoing in there because the act it is updating is quite old. So there's a lot of changes, but there doesn't appear to be significant material policy direction shift. It's mostly around updating for some very outdated procedures under this. So at this stage, we didn't feel there was a huge amount to bring to risk and assurance.
Any questions of members and councillors?
Just, can you just amplify what you just said about it was difficult to tell what happened there in terms of the voting age?
I've read there appears to be, so feedback from the Minister for Local Government was he was not going to do anything with the 17 recommendations on the future for local government until local government gave him a steer on what they wanted to do. And then this week in Parliament, they've introduced, government's introduced legislation around lowering the voting age to 16. And the feedback is, well, that's in response to a Supreme Court decision around that occurred last year, which seems to be contradictory to his previous conversation around we're not touching any of these 17 recommendations. And the legislation was introduced very late and it didn't take, there was very little debate with it before it was tabled and Parliament rose. So,
So we consider under urgency?
No, it doesn't appear that it will be considered under.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I've
But it was
read
late.
various comments on that from various sources, and I don't understand why they did it.
No.
Great question.
Great question. And I would add, yeah, and you've got to question the Supreme Court's decision if you relate it to other acts of Parliament that are age restrictive, or because that brings into whole question the validity of the youth justice system, in my view, because that's discriminatory against anyone who's over that age. And so it's just inconsistency right across the board. I guess my question, I'll let others go first because I want to talk more about spatial planning.
I just, a couple of questions here, I just really highlight to the committee, right, on the changes to the Building Act. We've been here before and it ended very badly for local government. Cost local government a lot of money, particularly with other providers providing building consent processing inspections. We were the last man standing. And also you mentioned the change to the Civil Defence Act. My understanding is the NEMA Act says in terms of the 60-40 split between local government and central government that requires now a council. The old Civil Defence Act said council needed to make a provision for its share. It now mandates you've got to insure for your share. So how does that actually impact if council decides to have a disaster contingency fund that is outside of the 60-40 split? You've got to have insurance on top of it, which seems quite bizarre. So you're not allowed to self-insure. You've got to pay the insurance companies to insure. You may want to look at that under report. Sorry, I didn't mention that before. That for me, that's actually quite a fundamental change, which seems to have slipped through.
Our hope with the emergency management bill is that it encourages and drives NEMA to do a whole bunch of things that a lot of the emergency management organisations are waiting for NEMA to.
Yep. I agree with that, yeah. Councillor Ron, Mayor Ron, oh, that's 3 times. I'm out. Goodbye.
Look, forgive me, I read the commentary around spatial planning and that sounds positive. But I got a but. Because what I don't see, the regional planning committees established as committees of all councils in the region, and they're stewards of the RSS and the NBE. But the question I have hanging in my head is what level of influence will we, as a small council, continue to have over our own spatial planning, or the level? We're currently locked in conversations with all of the other mayors and councils around the future development strategy, which includes spatial planning. How does this being a bigger, new centralized entity enhance better what we're currently doing? That's what I don't get.
$1 million question.
I could, I don't have a specific answer for your question. It's quite difficult. What I can say is, I noticed I've got Solitaire online. The Spatial Planning Act, when it applies to Carterton, will take approximately 10 years to come into force, because we're currently undertaking a review of the district plan.
Yep.
And so the Spatial Planning Act will only come into force for Carterton or the Wairarapa district after our current district plan expires. Now, and the Act allowed for those that are currently reviewing their district plans to continue on with that process. So there will be a period of approximately a decade where we will be in control of our own future. And after that time, we will have to form part of the Regional Planning Authority, and the Spatial Planning Act will take over.
But hopefully they've ironed out an awful lot of the
gremlins.
Yes, and perhaps with Chair's permission, I'd invite Solitaire to add her views, who's probably a whole lot more informed on this topic than I am.
Welcome, Solitaire.
look very comfortable.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Morning, everyone. I'm in my big fluffy warm gear, keeping warm. Yeah, the RMA reforms are not a bad thing, but it's going to take a very, very long time to get through. And I think huge kudos to the Wairarapa councils for proceeding with their district plan review. As the chief executive has indicated, it is going to be a time frame. You know, you've got to get those spatial planning committees set up before you can even move down that next path. So we're in a really good space to be part of our own destiny. And what we will have at the end of our district plan review is a very robust, very new plan that when we do end up in a much larger, we've got a very new Wairarapa focus, showing the directions where Wairarapa wants to go as a whole to be able to feed into that document. So I think we'd be in a really strong, having just done it. If it gets to be 10 years down the line, or we get to that point, well, we've probably still got more of a modern plan than some of the other councils that would be going into that.
Okay. Thank you for that, Solitaire. Any other, Councillor Grace?
As with the Three Waters conversation, I think it's worth noting the risk and uncertainty with regards to the election in 51 days and counting. And I've gone on both the National Party's and the ACT Party's websites to check their positions on RMA, and they both said RMA is broken, yes, but this isn't the right bill. It's not fixing the issue. I'm just wondering if there's been any policies from National Act that has given you any steer on if those changes could be in our best interest. I'm just conscious that everyone is saying it's broken and no one is seeming to have an answer right now.
Yep.
Which makes your job very difficult.
Yeah, maybe I can help. Maybe I can help.
The mayor has a statement.
Hi, Ron. Those acts are terrible. We will repeal them both before Christmas, revert to the RMA with some immediate fast tracking and prioritisation measures added. Then medium term, look to replace the RMA with something better. Chris Bishop will be happy to discuss it with you further, Nicola.
Yeah, I saw he had done a press release saying that we're going to get rid of it in 100 days. Yeah. Second question is, how much of our council staff time is being put to dealing with RMA reform at the moment? given that it could all be in the tin in 50 days?
So two really good questions. Perhaps I could go back to the conversation we had around water services entity legislation and the 4 pieces of legislation that had been enacted. And Chair pointed out that some of that legislation is already in force. So Auckland and Northland Water Services Entity is part of the Act, and it will be, they are going live on the 1st of July 2024. The difference with the RMA is they're not going live at the moment. And so the ability to amend these acts is probably significantly greater than there is with the water services entity, because none of this is in force.
That's right.
And I take a little bit of comfort from that, because these things are quite significant changes for our community and how we interface with our community around building things and what we do with the neighbours. So that gives me a lot more comfort that there is potential for it to be amended post the October election. To answer your second question, how much of staff time is spent on this? Not nearly as much as we spend on water services. And because the Wellington Regional Leadership Forum acts pretty much like the Regional Planning Committee anyway. So it's mana whenua, it's Crown, and it's all councils, and each party has a single vote. So that's almost identical to what is proposed as the Regional Planning Committee. So we're already operating like that anyway, just not in a planning environment for specific planning decisions. So we're not spending a huge amount of time on this in terms of staff workforce. And, you know, at this stage, we think it's probably going to be a decade before we actually have to really turn our attention to it in the Wairarapa.
Okay. Any other comments?
Thanks, Chair. Jeff, just in regards to Māori land, and is there anything in the coming through in the Spatial Planning Act as such that will be able to work its way into our proposed district plan that will allow Māori to utilise their land however they choose without having to go through the resource consent process?
It's a great question, and I believe the answer to that is yes. And I'll hand over to Solitaire.
Solitaire, thank you again.
Cool. Thanks, Steve. To be honest, as what we've just said, the Spatial Planning Act is going to take quite a long time to come into effect. So we've been focusing on our district plan, in which we've been developing the Māori purpose zone. And we've had 2 huis with a number of representatives, both iwi, hapu and trustee level. 60 people at the first hui, and I didn't attend the one on Saturday, but that also had a good number of people. And the intent is to be looking at specific Māori land, i.e. where marae is, or Māori freehold land, and removing the barriers for Māori to be able to do what they want to do on their land. And as we've said at the huis, the success of a Māori purpose zone is so that I shouldn't be the person signing off a consent to be able to build papakainga housing on marae land. We need to be enabling this, and we need to be supporting that. So that's the intent of where we're going. And as I said, you know, this legislation could be 5-10 years before it comes into effect. So we need to look after our local hapu and our local iwi now while we can via our district plan. Does that semi-answer your question? As in, we're listening to what the government's saying in that space.
Thanks, Sol.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Ron?
Yeah, thank you. Look, Chair, can you just talk us a little bit about the risks in the building consent system review? Promoting competition and building regulatory system, removing impediments to product substitution variations. We've been at a bit of deja vu in here. Have any comments you'd like to hear with us? Cautionary comment?
Absolutely. So those who've got long memories or been around local government long enough, that you remember, some may remember that there was some time ago, the private certifiers. So the council, you could actually go to a private certifier rather than a building consent officer. The council still you had to still lodge your consent, but someone else did the inspections. As part of that process, there was the requirement to have insurance in case the person made a mistake. That insurance didn't hold up, but because the council technically issued the consent, they were still liable for that building certifier's mistake, and the insurance that was supposed to be in place wasn't there. So the council was left carrying the financial can yet again. All right, so that's the first cautionary tale. There needs to be a transfer of liability from councils if that is to happen, right, providing that competition. The other one is removing impediments to building substitution. People may remember that you could actually use for quite some time non-treated timbers as approved, and other products approved by, wasn't MB, it was predated MB, that then contributed to the leaky home saga. And again, council was the last person standing. There was a court case taken against
DGH, wasn't it?
Yeah, and the judge says, no, they weren't liable.
Yep.
Okay, so again, council was the last person standing, please pay up. And that to me is the real concern that I have from a risk perspective for all local authorities.
What was that split? It was government fronted, some councils paid the rest. What was that split?
Oh, there was a leaky home resolution service.
That's right.
Right, but again, irrespective of fault, council then had to pick up the tab.
Yeah. So,
does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm probably one for Solitaire to do better delivery of building consent services.
Yeah.
I mean, Carterton's got an enviable reputation nationally for our team in that space. So,
and I think also, our recent IONS report, which comes through and audits our regulatory team, so that we do have really good checks and balances in place around those consents. So I take comfort from the fact that councillors believe, and we do have a really good consenting team, but also that IONS, an independent auditor, verifies that.
The quality of our work is not harmed.
Solitaire, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, just in terms of that better delivery of the consent services, we're very much supportive of that, and we've noted that we do work closely with South Wairarapa and Marsden in terms of training and helping each other out, but that the legislation is a primary barrier to being able to have like a Wairarapa building consenting authority, because as we've said, we would have our own independent audits, and they have to be one for a generic building consenting authority. So there's a lot of cost, and the legislation does not, this stage, encourage working together. So we've submitted quite strongly on that one, because we do think it is a space where consistency across the Wairarapa is good.
I agree. That's a no-brainer, right? It's also consistency, right? But we've got to be careful of where that liability actually then sits.
Yeah, and given current discussions and the difficulties there, how feasible is that?
Yeah.
You're talking about a shared service.
I'd leave that. That's a governance decision.
Nice.
I was going to say,
a nice serve, right? Okay.
Sounds like an underarm bowl to me.
No, nice serve. Nice return volley. Nice return volley. Nothing underarm about that. Right. Any other quick questions, comments on this paper? I think we've got an appropriate recommendation there that we just received the report. No further. So you're moving that, are you, Steve?
Yes.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Oh, thank you, Grace. No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Next item, advantage of implementation implementation of an artificial intelligence tool policy. I think that an artificial intelligence could actually run this meeting far more efficiently. Chief Executive.
Perhaps I could speak to the report. So some councillors may recall in the ordinary council paper, there was a photograph of a dog. Do you recall the photograph of a dog, and the background had been moved and changed out for the dog? So we are using artificial intelligence in our business, and in that case, we were using it on images and that we were using for our communications team. But we thought it was really important just to flag up to council that it is in our council. We use it for small things, but it's permeating the world. So.
Yep.
It's interested in the generated report. It just shows AI is not infallible. They think a water race is an event. And the whole story is around who might be coordinating.
Elemental dragons.
A spring. Yeah.
Good.
All right. So
just before you're about to move the recommendation, Mr. Chair, I'd like to point out that both reports were written by AI.
Wow.
Truly. The first report was written by AI in under a second. I changed one word.
Yeah, Dale, I didn't ask you to do it for, I just sent it to you.
So now you understand the power of AI in our business, that both of these, we formatted the first report, obviously, to fit council format, but both reports were written by AI in under a second.
Wow.
So you don't need another staff member.
And I think this highlights that we've got to acknowledge AI is there. We've got to, how do we utilise it best without actually enhance our business without actually
It's conflict.
taking over. Sorry?
Well, the tool's conflicted.
That's exactly right. So it did write a report about itself.
No declaration of conflict of interest.
The challenge is it doesn't have morals, it doesn't have background or ethics or decisions around race or sex or creed. As we heard in the local government conference, the AI tool was so you recall the recapture thing that says click on the 3 images that have a pedestrian crossing or a street lamp. And that tool's designed to stop robots getting past a paywall. And so they tried with ChatGPT version 5, I think it was, or version 4. They asked that tool to get round recapture. And so it outsourced it on the internet and it outsourced it to a work tasks thing. The human then came back and said, "Are you a robot? Why have you outsourced this?" And it replied, "I'm visually impaired." So the AI has no morals about lying and telling. And again, with the elemental dragons, it picks up what is on the internet. So it picked up the fact that elemental dragons are mythical, but it had no idea what a water race was. But in some cases, like the front report, it's incredibly difficult to tell whether that was written by AI or a human. And I guess what we're trying to highlight with this particular report to the risk committee is there are risks with AI in our business.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you don't even know they're there.
I'm certain we all picked it up.
So I apologise for the slight trickery in that particular report, but I thought it was really important to highlight the power that AI has currently.
Thank you. We'll note that in the public excluded item. Right. On that note,
you might just wish to note the report.
And note the appropriate concerns. Right. No.
So we wouldn't be commending the staff.
Right. I'm just also concerned if that was the case, Chief Executive, the author is actually incorrect.
David Johnson did generate both the reports using AI.
Okay.
I don't have a login.
Okay. Right. So we're going to note the report. Do we have a mover for that, please? Oh, Mayor on?
No.
No.
Noted.
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 Right, we might actually vote, right?
Hashtag A.
Do I have a seconder? Thank you, councillor Grace. All those in favour? Aye. Those against? Carried. Right. Can I have a mover? We move into public excluded. Dale, do I have a seconder? Thanks, Steve. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Take a 30-second break. No, I note that we are got 17 minutes before, less than that, 16 minutes before we scheduled